Hello and welcome to episode 203 of the Mark and Me podcast. As always, I'm your host Mark. Now joining me on today's episode is the original drummer for the Red Hot Chili Peppers, but also the incredible musician and composer for one of my favourite soundtracks of all time, Drive. Yes, I'm joined by Cliff Martinez. This is a huge interview for me, and I'm absolutely thrilled that he's coming on today's episode, and that interview will be coming up in just a couple of moments' time. I always like to use the intro of each and every episode of Mark and Me to touch base and talk about my previous episode. On episode 202, I was joined by Shane Told, the singer and songwriter from the incredible band Silverstein. I want to say a massive thank you to everyone that listened. The response was absolutely incredible. I actually got to meet Shane this weekend at Slam Dunk Festival in the UK, and he told me about how great the response had been as well personally for him from doing the episode, so thanks again from us both. But today is a big one. Drive is one of my favourite films. The soundtrack alone is absolutely exquisite, so I'm thrilled that Cliff is here to talk about this in so much more detail, and also his early days. I mean, being the drummer of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, so many stories and so much to share, so I think the best thing to do is to get straight to it. So here's me and Cliff talking all things music. So Cliff, thanks for joining me today on the Mark and Me podcast.
Glad to be here. Always love talking about myself. So
That's always a good way to start. So Cliff, what I want to do today for people that are tuning in and maybe discovering your work for the first time, let's go right back to the very start. So before you started being a drummer or being in rock bands or anything like that, what made you want to be a musician? Was it a certain band that you listened to, or an album you bought, or a concert you went to? What was it that triggered it for you?
probably a number of things. One of the biggest ones was seeing the Beatles on Ed Sullivan. I think that was 1964. I was 10 years old. That had a big impact on me. I had a crush on my babysitter who always had like a transistor radio attached to her ear, and she listened to music all the time. And I kind of got into it. As a matter of fact, her boyfriend who used to come over, I thought was really cool, and he was a drummer. So those things all had an impact on me. I think in 64, 65, my parents took me to the Museum of Modern Art to see an exhibit by the Bachet brothers. And I saw like their metal sculptures. And many years later, I got a Bachet crystal because of the impact that had on me. So back then, radio was kind of the way you got music. And so I got, very early on, I was listening to the radio and got very excited about music. I think in grade school, like around fourth grade, the schools encouraged children to take up a musical instrument to play in the orchestra, which would have been fifth and sixth grade. And my parents took me to a local music store and asked me about, what instrument would you like to play? And I said, well, guitar. And they said, we don't have a guitar teacher. Okay, how about drums? Well, we have a drum teacher. So that's how for a couple of years, all I had was the snare drum, but I knew I would one day graduate to the drum set and, not play orchestral music, but play rock and roll. So those are, that was a long-winded answer, but there were a lot of things that impacted me, and probably ground zero was seeing the Beatles on television.
And obviously, during your time, you got to spend 3 years with the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Now, those early albums are pure funk, absolutely incredibly raw, but it must have been amazing to look back and be part of such a successful band and be in history, with the Hall of Fame and everything that comes with that band, and they're still going strong now. You must be really proud to have been associated with them.
Yeah, their longevity is kind of unusual. There's not many bands that survive several decades and different milieus of musical styles, because music is a you know, is a fashion. And a lot of bands, well, if they don't explode in a, cloud of hatred and animosity for one another, then they simply go out of fashion and cease to be relevant. So the Chili Peppers have persevered. They've managed to kind of, grow and develop. So yeah, I'm proud to have been a part of the band.
And when did it change for you then to go from behind the kit and to start composing? What was it that kind of made you want to take that step and move completely in a completely different direction?
Well, getting pushed out of the Chili Peppers helped.
Yeah.
That that got me thinking about. But in a way, it was timely because I think I was starting to spend less time in nightclubs and bars and concert halls seeing live music and spent more time watching movies. And my taste in music has always been a little left of center. My biggest hero is Captain Beefheart, and I got to play with him on his last album. So I've always kind of really liked the fringe of musical style. And I thought that, you could listen to the entire radio dial and only hear like 4 or 5 different styles. Whereas I thought film music was much more diverse. You could hear, avant-garde classical symphonic music and horror films. You could hear jazz. You could hear symphonic music. You could hear electronic music. And that really appealed to me. The kind of the broad range of styles in film appealed to me. And I also thought, I'd be able to express my more sort of avant-garde tendencies in film music. So that's what started it. And the other thing was that I really became fascinated with music technology, which was just beginning around in the 80s.
Yeah.
It started with the producer of the first Chili Pepper album, Andy Gill. He brought in a Lynn drum machine to the recording sessions, and he knew that the band was kind of hostile to electronic gizmos. So he gave it to me to said, you should program it. And I was completely, it was like a love-hate thing. I was fascinated by what the drum machine could do. I was also threatened by it. I felt that I just sensed that drummers were going to go the way of the brontosaurus. They would just be an extinct species, and drums would be the first to go. Years later, string players were threatened by technology, but I kind of sensed that drummers would be the first to go. So I fell in love with the drum machine, and it never got used on the first Chili Pepper album, but my fascination with music technology, computer music technology, started with that drum machine.
I love it.
Yeah.
So a few years later, obviously we fast forward a bit, but you got to work with Steve Soderbergh, who is one of the best directors I think in the world. And when you look at his back catalogue of incredible films, stuff like Traffic and Sex, Lies and Videotape, all those sorts of amazing films that you look back now at, and they're cult classics for a reason. What was it like being such a big fan of film and then getting to work with such a legendary director and be able to put your part to this jigsaw, which is so crucial to any film?
Well, I wasn't at all intimidated because Steve Soderbergh at the time, in 1989, wasn't really Steve Soderbergh yet.
No, that's fair, yeah.
I saw a rough cut of the film, and everybody involved in it knew that it was like a good film, but nobody sensed that it would take off, that it would be a big indie hit. We thought it was like too smart for what, or that was my impression. I just didn't know. I was uncertain that it would find an audience. And I think everybody involved was quite stunned at the reception it got at the Sundance Festival. I was there on the second day, which is kind of when Steve started becoming famous.
Yeah.
And so we kind of, it was like riding a rocket ship. We kind of saw it take off, but again, I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know that he would make a film like Traffic. I didn't know that he would persevere and develop and become, one of Hollywood's 500-pound gorillas. So I guess I wasn't that intimidated, except that I'd never done a film before.
No.
Years later, Steven said something like, well, I hired Cliff because he was the only composer I knew in Hollywood. I'm sure there's some truth to that. I didn't know what I was doing, and he was really my guide, because he had some strong instincts about music and how to use it in the film. And they're also very, distinctive ideas about, less is more. And I think Sex, Lies, and Videotape, the running time was around 90 minutes, but there was only 20 minutes of music.
Yeah.
Whole film. So that's pretty stark. Years later, it seems like your average film is half the running time is music. But he had a very stark, minimal electronic approach that kind of became my style for many years. And it all developed with him, with Sex, Lies, and Videotape, because I didn't have any idea what I was doing.
I love it, and I love the honesty. But then moving obviously on to what we're promoting today, the soundtrack for one of my favourite films, truly, and I own the soundtrack on vinyl. I'm a huge fan of it, but Drive, you just said less is more. I think the whole film's less is more. The acting performances are never over the top. The style is never too much. It's really subtle, but in the way that it leaves you thinking and blown away. And your soundtrack for that is just a work of absolute art. Now, how did it get involved that you started working with Nicolas on this, for me, absolute masterpiece of a film?
Well, first, I just wanted to comment on Nicolas in general. I think he shared a certain sensibility with Steven, which is the less is more idea. And I think the power of Drive and of Steven's films is that it never talks down to the audience. It's because there's not a lot of dialogue, and because he leaves a lot of the conclusions up to the audience to, decide, is this scene scary? Is it romantic? Is it this or is that? I think that's the strength of both directors. They give the audience credit for being able to think for themselves, and that's what makes their films rewarding to watch, to be an audience of. I guess I didn't answer your question. I'm sorry.
I was just very intrigued on how you got involved with working with Nicolas. Did he reach out to you because of your previous work? Was it a project that someone was representing for you to get you some work? How did it actually come about that you and Nicolas met to then work on Drive?
I'll try to condense it because it's a little convoluted, but I was working on a film called The Lincoln Lawyer. And was that 2010? Yeah, 2009, 2010. And the head of Lakeshore Music, with the Lakeshore film, was Brian McNellis, who was a friend of one of Drive's producers, Adam Siegel. And those two were friends. Adam, initially, I'm told, Nicolas wanted to do all songs, because he had I think his previous film was Bronson.
Yeah.
And that was all songs, and he did it that way. And that was where he was headed with Drive, apparently. And then at a certain point, they just decided that, I don't think that's going to work. I think you need an original score. And Adam Siegel reached out to Brian McNellis and asked him if he had any ideas or thoughts. And he recommended me. He introduced me. So Brian introduced me to Nicolas. We went out to dinner. I knew he was Danish, and he took me to the best sushi restaurant in the Valley. And I thought, that's kind of weird. He seems to know more about LA than I do. And then he came over to the house. I had the crystal in the living room. I played it for him. He goes, and I'd played it for directors before, and they always said, yeah, we got to have it in my film. And then when they actually hear it detached from being in the living room watching me play it, they think it's too dark or too scary or too whatever. Um, but so I think those two things, the dinner and then playing the crystal in the living room, kind of got me the job.
And watching this film and the way it's filmed and the lack of dialogue and everything, you had quite a big job to fill those voids, but you do it subtly, you do it so well, and it must have been such a pleasure to work on because it is one of the most cult sort of iconic films now of the last 20 years.
It's rare that you get to see a film before you say yes to the job. I mean, prior to 2011, I was not a popular composer. So if somebody just said, "Do you want a job?" I would say yes. But you know, now I can be somewhat selective, but you still tend to say yes if anybody wants to hire you. But back then, it was unusual to see what was a locked picture. It was the final cut of the film minus the sound and music work. And they showed me the film before I agreed to anything. And I usually don't see a final cut of a film, but I fell in love with the movie. I thought it was a terrific film. I gave up at that point predicting the success or lack of success of any film. Um, so I just reacted to it, and I just thought it was a fantastic film, and it would be great to work on. And the song choice was pretty. The songs were the 5 songs that were in the film were all locked in, and I thought, well, I can incorporate that style, that kind of 80s synth pop thing. I can incorporate that into the score stylistically. And I think that's, I've been scratching my head for the last, few, trying to figure out what is the recipe? How would I ever repeat the success of that soundtrack? And I think, I don't really know, but I think that's part of it. The fact that the songs and the score are integrated, because usually the underscore and the songs go their
Yeah.
stylistic ways, and it's a very unified mix of songs and original underscore. And I think somewhere in there is the secret formula.
What I do on the podcast, Cliff, is I ask every guest, and we've just hit 200 episodes, but every single guest, it doesn't matter if they're a writer, a director, a composer, a musician, they all get the same question to end with. And it's not easy, and I think you'll struggle because of your history. The outro piece of music on today's episode is chosen by the guest, but it's on the spot, so I don't let you come back to me in a week. I don't let you get to think about it too hard. But the final piece, after we've edited this interview today and it goes out there for the world to listen to, the podcast ends with one piece of music, and you get to choose it today, right now, on the spot. It can be any song, any band, any composer, but what is the song that means a hell of a lot to you, that when all this is done and it plays perfectly as an outro song, you'd be really happy with?
Pachuco Cadaver by Captain Beefheart and the Magic Band from the 1969 album Trout Mask Replica.
Amazing. I like that you knew that. Some people want a few minutes. People start going, I've got a list of 3, but you're obviously a huge fan, and to get to play with that band and be there, it must be a dream come true.
Well, he turned out to be an abusive tyrant, so be
At
careful
the time, yeah.
Yeah, it was fantastic because the music was magical to me. I just didn't understand how that possibly could have been written and composed and created and recorded. And I got a front row seat. So yeah, it's still like the highlight of my musical career to have worked with him and seen his process up close.
Amazing. Thank you for your time today, Cliff. It's been an absolute honour. Like I said, I get to do interviews all day, every day, but when someone comes up that I absolutely love and I love their work, it's an absolute pleasure, and the soundtrack is something I play regularly, so thanks so much for coming on.
Well, thank you. My pleasure. And edit me with impunity. Make me sound, make me look like Brad Pitt.
I'll do my best. So there it is. There's my interview with me and the amazing Cliff Martinez. As I said at the start of today's episode, I absolutely adore Drive. And the good news is right now, Second Sight, who for me are the best company out there for Blu-ray and 4K releases, have just this week released Drive as a special edition. The box set is incredible, but honestly you need to check it out. The packaging alone is worth the money. And if you check out my social media channels this week, I am giving one of those away, so massive thanks for Second Sight for sorting that out for me. If you've really enjoyed today's episode, all I ask is you to hit the share button on either Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. All the links to my social media channels are on markandme.com. It costs you absolutely nothing to do and can bring a whole new audience to Mark and Me. So please, if you've enjoyed today's episode, retweet, share it on Facebook or post it on your Instagram. It really goes a long way. And if you've really enjoyed today's episode, I do have a Patreon account. Each and every month, thanks to my amazing friends at Richer Sounds, I have headphones, Sonos, home cinema kit, portable speakers and some incredible prizes to give away, just for saying thank you for supporting me on Patreon. Not only that, at the moment you're getting an average of 2 episodes every single week. Some incredible content, and I am going to start this month doing some exclusive episodes just for people that support me on Patreon. The link is on markandme.com, and please, you can sign up for as little as £1 a month, and it really goes a long way. I'm not slowing down anytime soon. You're going to get so many episodes coming out over the next few weeks, and honestly, it's some of the best stuff I've recorded and such a variety of guests. So until then, watch Drive, listen to the soundtrack, take care of yourself, and I'll speak to you all soon.
A squid eating dough in a polyethylene bag is fast and bulbous. Got me? When she wears her bolero, then she begin to dance. All the pachucos start with holding hands. When she drives her Chevy, sissies don't dare to glance. Yellow jackets and red devils buzzing round her hair hive hole. She wears her past like a present, takes her fancy in the pants. A sedan skims along the floorboard, her 2 pipes humming carbon cob. Got her wheel out of a B-29 Bomber, Brody knob amber, Spanish fringe and talcum tassels, forever amber. She looks like an old squaw Indian. She 99, she won't go down. Avocado green, alfalfa yellow adorn her to the ground. Tattoos and tarnished utensils, a snow white bag full of tunes. Drives a cartoon around. Broma sells a blue umbrella, keeps her up off the ground. Round red sombreros wrap her high-top horse shoes. When she unfolds her umbrella, Pachuco's got the blues. Her lovin' make me so happy. If I smile, I crack my chin. Her eyes are so peaceful, thinks it's heaven she been. Her skin is as smooth as the daisies in the center where the sun shines in. Smiles as sweet as honey, Her teeth as clean as the combs where the bees go. When she walks, flowers surround her. Let their nectar come into the air around her. Her love sticks out like stars. Her loving stick out like stars.